Namaste and greetings. I, Aswash Mahanta, a researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to all of you to IMPRI Web Policy Learning. Today, we are gathered here for the day 2 of a 3-day immersive online certificate training course on India's G20 Presidency and the contours of Indian foreign policy. This training program is organized by the Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies, CIRSS, IMPRI. I welcome you all to this wonderful deliberation and thank you for putting your time, energy, and efforts to truly understand issues surrounding India's G20 presidency and the contours of India's foreign policy. This session will be moderated by our convener, Dr. Simi Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director at IMPRI. These 3 days, the entire program has an excellent panel of members who will be sharing their knowledge on the above theme. The distinguished panel includes, in no particular order, Ambassador Shashank, Captain Alok Bansal, Ms. Nandita Barua, Ambassador Anil Trigunayach, Professor Sanjay Chaturvedi, Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, Mr. Don McLean Gill, Dr. Parama Sinha Palit, and Professor Annapurna Nautiyal. Before we start today's session, I would like to announce the housekeeping rules once again. Please join the meeting on time. There will be a question and answer session after each presentation. Share your questions on the Q&A box and not on the chat box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise. Refrain from making general comments in the question to save time. Now, without further ado, I'd like to invite our convener and moderator, Dr. Simi Mehta, to start off the session with her opening remarks. Looking forward to hearing from you. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ashwas, and a very good evening to everyone. It is my honor to be hosting this program on behalf of IMPRI Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies. So this web policy learning has been very carefully and meticulously curated for those who are interested in the latest developments in India's foreign policy, especially given the fact that we are hosting India as the G20 president for this current year. There are more than 200 meetings that are scheduled to be held in different tier 1 and tier 2 cities, and it means a lot as far as India's ambitions and global aspirations are concerned, as India moves forward to becoming a superpower and a global leader in the world affairs. So yesterday we had very interesting sessions by Dr. Parama Sinha Palit, by Mr. Don McLean Gill, and also by Professor Annapurna Nautiyal. And today we have an excellent panel of experts, starting with Ambassador Shashank. Good evening, sir, and I welcome you heartily to this program. Thank you for joining us, and I give you the stage. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Simi Mehta.
Before that, if I would request Ashwas to just quickly introduce Ambassador Shashank for the audience. Thank you.
Yes. Again, as ma'am has mentioned, we are extremely glad to have amongst us Ambassador Shashank, who will be speaking on Diplomats' experience. Ambassador Shashank is the former Foreign Secretary at the Ministry of External Affairs, India. Sir, again, the stage is all yours. Glad to hear from you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ashwas.
Thank you very much, Ashwas and Simi. I think you have done a wonderful job in getting together this group by using the webinar method to discuss the G20 presidency by India and to see the contours of Indian foreign policy in the context of international relations at this stage. Well, when I joined the diplomatic service in 1966, and I think I can share some of my experiences, that we went through a system whereby we had just come out in the previous 15 years or so from the British colonial rule. we were one of the first countries to become independent. So many other countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, they looked forward to learn from our experience. Sometimes they had the feeling that maybe Indian troops were being used by the British colonial forces to subdue other countries and nationalist movements in other countries. So there were all these kind of confused feelings also. And thirdly, there were these large number of people of Indian origin, PIOs as we call them, who had gone to many of the developing countries, many of the colonized countries. So that was the background. And we joined the Foreign Service in 1966. I got the good experience of working in the United Nations in New York, and also in the United Nations division in the External Affairs Ministry. So that gives you the idea of dealing with the foreign policies and the actors on foreign policy from, let's say, 170, 180 countries at that time, now more than 200 countries now. So you get to know every day you are listening to the comments on different subjects, whether economic, political, strategic, everything from different countries. So it really goes inside your mind very, very deeply as to what all the feelings are. Also, the stage which India can acquire in due course. So what was happening is that in the non-aligned movement and in the group of 77 of developing countries on economic issues, we are working along with many other countries and moving together. But gradually we also found that it was not making much progress, and the unity of the countries as a group of more than 100 countries was all right in the beginning. But as the negotiations proceeded and as the talks became very, very complicated and fine-tuned, we found that countries were gradually moving away from countries like India or the bigger developing countries. So India, Brazil, Pakistan, Argentina, Mexico, and Egypt, and many others. So I think we have to keep that in mind, that we have unity, but there are specific interests of different countries, and how to keep them together to make sure that wherever there are commonality of interests of these countries, we can try to negotiate and get the best possible deal with them. Right now, we are having the G20 presidency, so for a long time, and I was foreign secretary in 2003, 2004. At that time, I remember several countries have told us that they would support India's membership as a permanent member of the UN Security Council as part of the reforms of the United Nations system. But it has not happened all this time. So, but gradually we have found that instead of the reforms of the United Nations or the other international organizations like World Bank or IMF, there is a gradual entry of larger number of countries in the consultation process, what is called G20. So G20 right now are the major developed countries and the emerging economic powers among the developing countries. So we have G20, most of them are from, many of them are from Asia. We have also seen that last year the summit, G20 summit took place in Indonesia. This year it is in India. And then it will be again 2 countries from the developing world, Brazil and then South Africa. So therefore, India has taken advantage of the G20 presidency by hosting the summit of the Global South. And I think that is one very important initiative which India has taken. That is, under this leadership as G20 president, we are trying to put together the views of the developing countries as a whole, and then seeing as to how much can be obtained the results in the G20 summit. This particular G20 summit, like the last year's one in Indonesia, is taking place in the context of the European crisis and the Ukraine-Russia war. Russians have attacked Ukraine. They have been saying that for a long time they have been negotiating with the West European countries, the NATO countries, that they should not put any missiles or any nuclear things close to the Russian borders. And it was always accepted that this will not be done. Yeah, so this was accepted. However, the NATO countries said that this was only a verbal kind of a clearance. There was no written agreement. But whatever it is, we have reached a stage where the European crisis is overshadowing the G20 summit this year in India. Last year, they did that in Indonesia. No decision could be adopted by the summit. No resolution was passed, no declaration was issued, but there was a chairman's statement. And I think something like this has been followed at the foreign ministers meeting and at the finance ministers meeting, which took place earlier this year in India. So what we can say that so far we have seen that the most successful gathering was the Global South Summit, which was addressed virtually by our Prime Minister, where we were able to put together the views of the Global South to be considered in the G20. Now, the importance of G20 we have to keep in mind has always been in the context of economic crises which have been affecting countries of the world. Like in 2008, we had the problem of the many banks going under. So there was a question of recession in several countries. And therefore, the idea was how to give support and set up some financial mechanisms internationally so that the financial institutions in different countries, the corporations, they do not suffer totally. Otherwise, there would have been a tremendous recession, what people have been talking of the pre-Second World War, 1930s crisis, which had affected the world. So I think G20 had played a very important role. So right now, we have G20 summit taking place in India. On one hand, we have the economic issues, which are now influencing the thinking in the world. For example, 3 banks, one of them very major bank in the United States, have just collapsed. US is doing its very best to keep the banks running and so that the people who have their deposits in the banks do not suffer, while action is taken against the managements of the banks if they did not look after the banking system properly. The other one is the European crisis, Russian-Ukraine war. So within this context, how to come up with decisions in the various meetings which India would be hosting in different parts of India. So I think this will be a big challenge, and it will also give an opportunity on both sides. That is India to show its acceptability by the wider world as a leader of the world in future and as a leader of the developing world, voice of the South at present. Secondly, within the country, we would be able to convey to all parts of India that they are all connected with this India, which is connected with the world. And therefore, all of them have a stake. All people, whether living in the east, west, north, south of India, they all have a stake in what India is going to achieve at the G20 summit. So I think all these issues we have to keep in mind. And I think that will be a big challenge for the G20 negotiators from India to bring about coalitions of those countries who would like to achieve specific results at the G20 meetings this year. And I think we have to work out so that more and more consensus is created, even among the G7 countries. So we are going to see that recently one of our Quad partners, Australian Prime Minister, was in India. And next week, we would have the visit by the Japanese Prime Minister, who would be hosting the G7 summit soon in Japan, who is also representing the Quad Summit partnership. So therefore, what we challenge for India would be to work with Australia, to work with Japan particularly, to see how G7 and G20 can both be helped together to achieve concrete results at the G20 summit. And I think that will be a challenge for the Japanese leadership and for the Indian leadership. Because one thing could be very clearly said that, all right, the minimum achievement can be like Indonesia did last year. They tried very hard till the very last moment to bring about a consensus. And if a consensus could not be reached, then go and have a declaration by the chairman. G7 also, Japan can have a very strong declaration from the G7 summit about the European crisis, about the various economic situations in different parts of the world. But it will not lead to any solutions. So therefore, we have to work hard this time during the Japanese Prime Minister's visit, during the interactions we would be having during the course of the year. As you know, that our Prime Minister has been invited by the US President to visit the United States. There will be also the Quad Summit, G7 Summit also, they are going to invite Indian Prime Minister to attend it. So I think therefore there are all these opportunities, and we have to try to bring together the aspirations of the global South on the table in a manner so that practical results can be achieved during the various confabulations and the meetings of the G20. So this is one thing we have to learn, that in the past, we had a different way. The non-aligned movement and the group of 77 of the developing countries, they could influence the deliberations in the UN Security Council, in the UN General Assembly, by virtue of their large number of vote base. In fact, if you remember, there was a time when the American permanent representative in the UN said that, look, these people from the developing South, they are hosting the whole United Nations to ransom because they don't allow us to do anything that we want to do. So that was the situation at that time. Now we have reached a position of more greater pragmatism, of finding partnerships among the developing countries and partnerships between the developed and developing countries. And India is working very hard on this issue. We have to also keep in mind that we have adversarial relations among our neighboring countries in Asia, for example, China and Pakistan. These are the two adversarial nations. With China, we have had some border conflicts recently in the last 3-4 years, and India has taken the decision to build up all the border infrastructure very solidly, and also to strengthen its defense requirements by Atmanirbharta campaign and by continuing to buy from wherever we can buy the defense armament, as well as the economic resources that are needed for increasing Indian economy. So let's say fuel, food items, fertilizers, and all these kind of things. So I think this on about China. On Pakistan, we find that not only there have been conflicts in the past, but also Pakistan has been found to be encouraging terrorism in different parts of India, and not only in India, but in some other parts of South Asia also. So therefore, we are again strengthening our relationships with the other countries to make sure that countries in our region, we are not thinking in terms of a conflict type situation like in Europe at present, but we would like that our situation becomes more peaceful and it remains peaceful. So we are trying to push the G7, trying to push the European powers towards some kind of a negotiated settlement. And similarly with China and Pakistan, we would like them to work towards peaceful and cooperative relationship among the countries in Asia. So I think I can stop at this, and perhaps we can go for more question answer, unless there are some issues which you would like me to consider. Simi, I will like you to tell me.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. It has been really insightful to listen to you. My question is about our neighbors. When India speaks of neighborhood first policy, then we have, as you mentioned, we have two adversarial nations to our north and to the west. Do you think that, and also because Pakistan is in a very, very dilapidated state of affairs right now, especially economically. And just very recently, the Biden presidency has allowed some aid of several billions of dollars to Pakistan. But always, as always, our concern has been that it will be directed against us in various forms of terrorism and such activities. How do you think can we really deal with such a situation? Because this has been happening all over the decades, and there's no sign of making things better with this country. And another question or curiosity for me is about Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka has been under massive debt with China, and it was India which came into assistance, came into help very recently to help avert a very bad economic crisis. But again, we see the leaders talking different things with respect to China and India. But is it like they forget the help that or the immediate assistance when they need it? A friend in need is a friend indeed. So does this apply to international relations as well? Because they keep looking up to China for other efforts also. So could you just throw some light on this? Thank you.
All right. Okay, so what I will say is that the traditional position which Pakistan has taken, and now China had also started following that, to bring together a coalition of countries around India and try to convince them that India is their enemy. And somehow India should be curbed. And they have been talking to these smaller countries in India's neighborhood by saying that since they're very small, they all have to work together, and China would help them with money. Pakistan would say, we would help you because we know India very well, and we can keep them weak by using all their internal fault lines. So therefore, this is how they were working so far. But what China has done, because China is not on the same track as India. China is on a track to overtake the United States, become the #1 military technology power in the world. So they are going in that direction. And to reach that goal, if they can get a lot of countries in some kind of a debt crisis with China, they would like it to continue to be like this. They would like them to suffer for a longer period and then see what the United States can do for them, what the other powers can do for them, and then tell them that, look, ultimately you have to come back to us and we will help you at that time. But under certain conditions, you have to give us, we'll give you more money, but more debt, and more equity has to be passed on to China for this purpose. Because China has started from a very low level. Americans have the advantage that Second World War, they had taken this land lease agreements with large number of countries, and they had acquired several islands and several territories all over the world for basing their naval forces and their air forces. Chinese don't have that. So Chinese are trying to move in that direction. Indians also, for some reason, because we were being used as the soldiers and as the PIOs, as workers in different countries, because we had the great genetic knowledge about the agriculture development. So wherever there were agriculture, they found, whether they were the French, whether the Dutch, the other colonial powers, that they had to depend on the Indian manpower to carry out the agricultural. So Chinese now find that Indians are all over the world. So Americans have their naval and air bases all over the world. Indians have Indian people all over the world. And there is a great amount of empathy for the Indians, because Indians have not been interfering in the internal affairs of these countries, but they have been helping them to remain more peaceful and develop much better. So therefore, China has to reach a level whereby they can counter India and they can counter America. In the 62, if you remember, Mao did it because he felt that India was so poor and so weak, and they were unnecessarily talking too much. So therefore, he wanted to prove to the world that India of 1962 was only a paper tiger or paper elephant. There was nothing to it. Therefore, it becomes upon us necessary that we create our capabilities tremendously, which we have done over the last several years, and especially in the last 8 or 9 years, that the infrastructure near China, near the Pakistani borders, has been created very strongly. In the Indian Ocean region, we have done that. And secondly, like Sri Lanka case you mentioned, we have done a lot of housing development for the Tamil origin people in Sri Lanka, #1. $3.9 billion were given when the Sri Lankans needed that help. No other country came forward. Indians went forward immediately. And I was listening to a speech by the Sri Lanka finance minister. And he said very clearly, he said, nobody helped us. No IMF, no World Bank, no China. It's only India which helped us. Of course, IMF will not talk about it. China will not talk about it. And even the Western media, either they would not know or they are not interested in what India is doing. Because they are interested in bringing out China's role. But they're not interested in raising India's profile. That India has to do, or our friends like Sri Lankans have to do it. In Pakistan's case, one has to keep in mind that firstly, we are continuing with our defense procurements from Russia. We have brought it down. Our dependence was about 80%. Now we have brought it down to about 60%. We have diversified defense purchases from other countries also. Secondly, we have given more teeth to the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. And we are trying to make sure that if the Pakistanis encourage terrorism to come out of Pakistan to other countries, then they should be put in the gray list or the black list. They have been able to come out of it for the time being, but that does not mean anything. They have to be extremely careful that they are under watch and they will be kept under watch. Their friends were Malaysia and Turkey, which helped them greatly. China, of course, also helped them greatly to get out of FATF. Finally, the Americans also helped them, but how long? At some stage, they will all have to realize that it does not help them. Pakistan has not been able to, because their internal divisions are so much, as you are seeing right now, that the former Prime Minister Imran Khan is likely to be arrested very soon. And he is talking against the present civilian leadership, he's talking against the military leadership. So I do not know what is going on in that country. So it's total, utter confusion. And Chinese, I do not know whether Chinese will be able to help them to that extent, because India definitely would not like to help either Nepal or Pakistan if they want to take Chinese help to build dams, roads, airports, and say, okay, India should use them and we'll create them from China. China will acquire our properties, but India should give us money to pay back to China. No, sorry, it doesn't work like this. When India is willing to help our neighbors very closely, as we are doing in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, Maldives, and other countries, Bhutan. So we are willing to help other countries also, but not to the extent that they want to pay back to the Chinese with the money that they get out of India or that they get out of IMF and others. So it's for them to decide. So this is the general feeling, as I can see, that we would like our neighbors to be friendly, not to be under pressure from India. And we feel that Chinese are trying to bring all their neighbors under pressure. So we would like to continue to have a dialogue with our neighbors in Southeast Asia, in Northeast Asia, in order to see what is China's behavior towards them, and if we can moderate that behavior in consultation with them. That's how the importance of East Asia Summit, now the importance of the Pacific Island Forum dialogue with India, and also our relationship with ASEAN countries and BIMSTEC and many of the other initiatives that we have taken for the Indian Ocean rim countries.
Right, sir. Thank you so much. Sir, there is I think Harsh Pargat, he would like to ask a question. Harsh, could you please unmute and ask the question? Yes, Harsh, please go ahead. You're not audible.
Am I audible now?
Yes, please go ahead.
So good evening, sir. Myself, Harsh Pargat. I'm currently pursuing Masters in International Relations and Security Studies at RRU. Sir, my question is, you highlighted India's relations with the neighboring countries. Sir, talking about the Hambantota port, how important it is for India to maintain strategic observance, considering that it's only since China's recent BRI project, there has been lots of backtrack from the African countries as well. So what should be India's approach towards Hambantota, sir?
Well, as far as I know, the Hambantota has two birds. Some birds have gone to China, other birds have come to India. Initially, there was a feeling that the whole thing would go to China, and then India was being advised to route its shipping through Hambantota. Now, originally, when India did not go to Hambantota was because we did not want to have too much of shipping going through that route. And I think now that we have one part of Hambantota port, we are also trying to do something on the Hambantota airport. So it might be possible to, over a period of time, that we can build up relations with Sri Lanka on that side also. But basic thing is that we would not like our neighboring countries to cooperate with China to an extent whereby it hurts the security interests of India. And that should be the important condition to be appreciated by them, that yes, we are not insisting that they should go by Indian approach all the time, but they should not go against India's interest, because that will not be in their interest. India is a democratic country. Wherever India has gone, we have worked in accordance with the popular wishes of the local people, local leaders. We have not tried to impose any views from India or to try to acquire mineral resources or other resources from those countries for India. So if it is it's a give and take, and whatever we give them, it's on the basis of their own priorities. We don't set the priorities for them. And I think these two things one has to keep in mind, that China is not a democratic country. They are very keen on becoming #1 power in the world. And if they ride roughshod over either their neighbors or any other country, they will do that. Because their ultimate aim is how to see that America becomes #2 and they become #1. India is not in that kind of a game.
Thank you, sir.
I would request Ashwash to ask his question.
Right. Sir, you mentioned about the European crisis or the Russia-Ukraine crisis that has been overshadowing G20 sessions or summits over the years. Sir, how do you think should India navigate this year's sessions so that it does not reorient itself to more of these issues and rather reorient the summit to the issues of the global south? So that is my question, sir.
Okay. Well, one is that global south have already expressed their priorities and their wishes, what they want from G20 summits. So, for example, they would like to have the sustainable development goals. They would like to have the climate issues to be taken care. They are worried about the fuel crisis, which is arising, the food crisis, which is there in the world, and the increased prices, the cost escalation, which is going on all over the world. So that they are very worried. So those should be the priorities which India should discuss with the G7 countries, with the developed countries, so that the G20 do not lose sight of the issues, how the Ukraine conflict, the European conflict is affecting adversely all other countries. Just to feel that, okay, it's the European crisis cannot be forgotten, and one has to take a very clear-cut view on the European crisis in G20. And unless you can take that view, nothing can be done with regard to the economic priorities being set by the global south or India. I think that perhaps would be a travesty, because we are still hoping that there have been talks going on at various levels, how to see that the conflict in Europe can be brought to a successful conclusion peacefully and through peaceful dialogue and negotiations. If, of course, there is no feeling at all, and if both sides feel that they are going to win the war, then there is no end to it. And then, of course, we can only try to request all the participants in the G20 that if that is the attitude, that is the final position taken by all the countries, party to the European conflict, then, of course, we should try to concentrate on the economic and social issues of priority to the global south, so that at least those priority issues are not left out during the deliberations in the G20 system. But on the other hand, we still are hopeful that there will be positive development, and there will be some kind of a feeling that at some stage, because a lot of people are losing their lives, and this conflict does not help anyone. A lot of money will have to be spent ultimately to recreate the infrastructure, to create better conditions for the people, to give them health and other things. So I think these are the issues which we have to keep in mind. And we do not know. I mean, another issue which I will mention that we did not talk about the special steps taken by India in the COVID crisis, that India helped people within India and also people outside by the large production of the vaccines in India by the Indian companies, which are supplied all over the world without any distinction. And therefore, this kind of situation can arise again. I mean, many of the specialists have been talking about another rise of COVID type of situation of this H3N2 or other kind of viruses which can mutate. So therefore, we have to keep in mind that a European type of crisis should not be seen as a very long-term ongoing crisis, but we have to try to find a solution to all the problems which arise, even in Europe.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir. I would request Karishma to please unmute and ask her question.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for the session.
Yes,
While we don't see a lot of complementarity in terms of traditional security issues within South Asia, as threat perceptions in South Asia have been always directed against each other, and there has been a dominance also of hard power politics. But in terms of non-traditional security issues, there is a lot of complementarity. What, according to you, is the potential of non-traditional security issues to improve relations between adversarial nations in this particular region?
you know, there are certain soft items where we have to maintain a reasonable relationship among people to people, among the requirements of all the countries in South Asia. Because we have to keep in mind that ultimately, if we call ourselves a democracy, if we want to spread the message of democracy and peace and our cultural values all around, then it should also take into account the situations prevailing in our neighborhood. And many of these countries, in many ways, were very close to India at one time, or parts of the larger Indian subcontinent. Now, they have, for various reasons, they want to somehow, number one, they want to show that they are totally independent, they can take their own decisions, they can bring in external powers to somehow curb India's role or India's position. Now, India would like to tell them that, look, if that is only for economic activities or improving the welfare life of their own people, then India should not mind it. But if they are trying to do it against the interests of their own people, against the interests of the people living in South Asia, then India has to take action, which will keep in mind that the longer term interests have to be taken care of, and not what they are trying to do is to promote terrorism or using drones for drug supplies and armament supplies, etc., in different parts of South Asia.
Thank you, sir. I would request Amrita to please ask the question. Amrita. Amrita, can you please unmute and ask? Okay, I'll, sir, with your permission, I'll just read out the question that she has for you.
Yes, yes.
There have been reports that Chinese have made significant investments into the Dhaka Stock Exchange. How should this situation be perceived, and what are the possible mitigation measures that can be adopted by India in similar such situations in its immediate neighborhood?
Very good question. I remember talking once to the Chinese ambassador in Delhi, and he told me that, look, everybody in all the international media, they keep writing against India and saying India is doing so badly and Indians have so many weaknesses internally and all that. And he told me, he said, no, his prime minister instructed him specifically, don't tell me about India's weaknesses, tell me 10 strengths of India and tell me how we can copy them. So he told me, he said, one of the strengths of India is in dealing with the capital markets and the stock exchanges. He said, look, we don't have much idea about the stock exchanges, but you Indians have. So I'm learning very much for it. And I put a lot of people to study from India about the Indian banking system, Indian capital markets, so Indian democracy. So there are about 8 or 10 subjects he told me. He said, look, we are concentrating on learning from India. So I think what they are doing, as I mentioned, that Chinese are quick learners. They are a very focused type of a community and go for long-term decision making. So they want to become #1 country in the world. And for that, if they can take part in the stock exchanges in Dhaka, Karachi, and elsewhere, maybe even in India. And if you allow them, they will come in. So what we have to see, how the stock exchanges of the neighboring countries or other countries are being manipulated by the Chinese, and how we can take care of our interests and also exchange views with those countries and tell them that what is going on in their countries. I think we have a lot of exchange mechanisms with different friendly countries. So I think in that context, Bangladesh is supposed to be very, very friendly with India. And I think we can definitely exchange views with them and see how the money coming into the Dhaka Stock Exchange is going to hurt them adversely.
Thank you, sir. That was very interesting. Now I'd like to request Abhinav to ask his question.
Thank you, Dr. Simi. Very good evening, Ambassador Shashank. I am Abhinav Sharma. I am doing my PhD in Latin American Studies in JNU. Yes. So I have a very generic question. I've Googled you and I know that you were the Foreign Secretary in 2004, and I read an article in the Tribune about you. So the question is this, sir. In India, is the only way to join or to have a say in diplomatic affairs is through IFS. We do have masters in IR and we have MPhil in different area studies in universities like JNU or South Asia universities. Is there any other way wherein we could apart from the bureaucracy, we could have like, for example, work in the India-Latin America diplomatic dialogue and get into it? Are there agencies apart from Mercosur and these kind of corporate agencies? I mean, what can be done? I mean, you could go, I studied global studies in University of Leipzig, sir, in Germany for 2 years. But then I was studying European studies and I thought this had nothing to do with India's foreign affairs. And India right now is the center, as we all know, and it'll be the future. So what do you have to say to us young people who want to pursue ourselves in this direction? If we are above the UPSC age, what do we do?
Yeah, I agree with you that foreign service was considered at one time the only way to get involved in the international relations field, apart from going to the universities. Some of them had the regional studies centers, but otherwise, by and large, the universities also concentrated more on the broad principles of international relations or political evolution over a period of time. And mostly it was the historical perspective rather than the current issues and the future challenges. I think the whole scenario has been changing rapidly. The universities are opening new departments. Many private universities have come up, so it becomes much easier for them, more flexible. Then, apart from the university academic circle, there are many think tanks which have come in. They are being funded by the government departments, also by private organizations. And many of them have started holding annual seminars and conferences where a lot of participation comes from other countries also. So I think many of them have built up ties with the think tanks, important think tanks in other countries. So there will be exchange of scholars among these think tanks in different countries, and similarly among the universities. So I think that we need to continue. I have also seen that many university departments have come together. They have opened, let's say, institutions, research centers for, let's say, African studies or Latin American studies. They have tried to involve some of the retired diplomats, but mostly there are the scholars and students doing PhD and MPhil from the Indian universities who are involved in them. So I think that is, these are other areas. Media, of course, is another one. I find that the Indian companies have started becoming multinational in many ways. So they also want to consult others in India who can tell them about their investment patterns and probabilities and risk factors in other countries. India does not have institutions which do the risk analysis. So I think that could be another way to enter that area of risk analysis. There could be also studies on the WTO mechanisms for trade issues and the trade resolving procedures. So I think these are the other issues which we can keep in mind. And I think this is a continuing field, but you're quite right. I mean, the chances normally were initially with the diplomatic service, but now let's say the defense ministry or the special branches of the defense forces, they have their own think tanks, and they are also encouraging a lot of organizations to take up the issues relating to these international issues. So I think openings are there, but it's still a long haul. So you have to work hard, but I think possibilities are there that you learn it in India as well as abroad.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And it has been really fantastic listening to you and your proactive response to all the questions and explaining to us the core issues, the nuances in detail on India's G20 presidency and foreign policy of India. Thank you so much, sir, for sparing your time this evening for us and for making the concepts much clearer. Thank you, and we are really grateful.
Okay, thank you very much, Simi. Very kind of you, and thank you all your colleagues also.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Thank you. Thank you. So I hand it over to Ashwas now for the next session.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Now I would like to invite our second expert for today's session. Our second expert is Ms. Nandita Barua, who will be speaking on feminist foreign policy. Ms. Nandita Barua is the country representative for India at the Asia Foundation. We are really glad to have ma'am with us. Over to you, ma'am.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nandita Barua. I'm the country representative of the Asia Foundation, and I'm really pleased to be here to provide some insights to this very interesting topic on G20 under India's presidency and its impact on foreign policy. And I'm going to be addressing this, of course, more broadly on the issue, but also more specifically from the perspective of what would it mean from a gendered or feminist foreign policy lens. What opportunities does it open up for India in the current context? I'd like to thank IMPRI for giving me this opportunity, and I'm sorry that I'm not able to do this in person, but I hope that any further questions or any clarifications that the participants who are listening in on this lecture may have would be forwarded to me, and I hope to be able to answer them to the best that I can. So jumping straight into the topic, I think we are today, as the world is watching us, India is playing a very critical role in its capacity and having taken over the presidency of the G20. Now, if we are to ask this question as to how is India going to take this opportunity and what would it mean, not just for India, but for the world as a whole, what perspectives, what thinking can India put forward? I'm going to begin by just going back to that one critical sentence that the Prime Minister made in Bali when he took over the presidency, and he said, "One Earth, one family, one future." And he emphasized on equitable growth and a shared future. I think, to me, that probably is the most critical, underlying vision for India's presidency in the G20. And equitable growth and shared future are critical. So that should be the driving force. Now, having said that, at the time when India took over the presidency, the world was facing a lot of crisis. We were coming out of COVID. We were seeing the economies of the global South and the global North fluctuating at different levels. However, I think at that point, one didn't see that there will be additional crisis at the global arena added to what we were already facing, and that turned out to be the war that broke out between Ukraine and Russia. So, navigating the G20 in light of this global polarization, the conflict, of course, of the developed North with counterparts in South, China being the main center stage, the conflict currently within Russia and Ukraine, and polarization of choices that other countries are making around this. All of this has created much larger challenges today as India navigates this G20 partnership. And it's becoming more challenging for us as a country to really focus on the earlier vision, which is equitable growth and shared future. Clearly, shared future at this point in the world doesn't seem to be having a shared framework. And I think that is where India is going to have to navigate its presidency. I think even as I look at it, I do want to go back saying, yes, world leaders are grappling with, what is the global stand going to be on Ukraine? While, we can say one way or the other on how legitimate the war is, who started it, all those questions. But two key questions remain, irrespective of where you stand on the war. There is no denying that the impact on people of both the countries has been immense, on women, on children, on girls, on young men and boys. And I think that any war, the one thing that I think we all know is that the displacement, the dislocation, the loss of opportunities, resources, cuts across both parties who are at war. It's not, it doesn't impact one or the other. And that also creates larger humanitarian crises. In this case, of course, it's about, the safety and the security of, let's just say, those impacted by the war on both sides of the border. And I think while we may, again, this was at the I think the foreign ministers meet, the G20 foreign ministers meet, I think the Prime Minister said something very interesting. He said, instead of focusing, while we may have a lot of disagreements on issues, we need to focus on what we agree on and what we can move forward on. And I do think that as India stands in this position today, it's critical how we frame the discourse around equity and inclusion, even in the most, conflicts-driven, most challenging situations that the world may face. I think on issues where we look at what should the world stand be when it comes to protecting, when it comes to providing, opportunities, resources, in a more equitable manner to the most affected, there should be a common framing. That brings me to the next point where I think, what is it that we are looking at? We are looking at, multilateral bodies and multilateralism to be defined in a much better way than it is today. We have seen the failure of multilateral bodies repeatedly, and I think I don't necessarily need to go into that. But then the question is, what is the multilateralism that India can help define at this point? Where do we stand in our perspective of being able to give, be the bridge between both the developed and the developing world by looking at some of the multilateral institutions who want to be doing this better than they are doing. And framing that discourse is also going to be critical to the G20 presidency of India. And I think India is focusing on that. And it is a sectoral thing. It's not like, it's not a singular box that we can plug multilateralism into, but multilateral institutes work across sectors, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's access to resources, climate, renewable energy. But across these sectors, the one, I think, underlying, focus or the one underlying commonality should be on how do you unpack this in a more equitable, more gender sensitive, more diverse access manner. Globally, we know that whether we look at the developed North or the developing South, people who are at the margins, at the fringes, are they're everywhere. Whether we are looking at people, we are looking at women who, of course, are globally face different levels of inequity and marginalization. We look at communities, ethnic minority groups, sexual minorities. These groups have remained and continue to be in the fringes. The women's movement, of course, has made more gains. And today, at least in some of our countries, we've had greater success, but it's still not a full success. It's still a long way to go. So we have to keep pushing the boundaries and the borders of bringing these groups who are on the margins, on the sidelines, into the mainstream of that equitable growth and the equitable and shared future that we are talking about. it cannot be shared if more than 50% are not a part of the discourse. So I feel that for India, bringing that discourse is going to be key, and we are seeing some of it. And it's becoming more and more difficult with the growing polarization, because then the focus then tends to shift to the issues which are polarizing, which is whether a war is valid or not, whether, you know, the origin of COVID needs to be debated or not, whether the economic, push factors that are happening between the North and the South are being driven by a country or not. Those are, while those debates remain and will take much longer to resolve, those debates also need to underpin the absolute need for having this more equitable and inclusive framework. None of those debates will reach any kind of viable conclusion if it is minus that lens of having all voices at the center of these discourses. I also feel that when we look at India, and I think, the Asia Foundation, along with some of our other partners, we have been talking about having this space for a feminist foreign policy. And I recognize the fact that currently within India, there is an interest and an appetite to really unpack this in a more structured and sectoral manner as to what would it mean if we are to start applying a feminist lens to our foreign policy. And all of what I just said is a discourse that is leading to how India takes its stand on foreign policy, not just vis-a-vis us as a country, but also creating a framework for the world at large. So coming back to this framing of a feminist foreign policy, I think we see it as a three level, inference. First, of course, understanding what it means when we say a feminist foreign policy. I want to start by saying, and I always think it becomes so important to say, a feminist foreign policy, the basic premise is inclusion. It's not exclusion at the cost of A or B. It doesn't really, it's not talking about saying, oh, we need to have, larger space for women. What it is talking is, we need to have a more concrete, a more defined discourse on how our actions outside our borders get defined by what we are doing inside the nation, and how those actions then impact on all marginalized communities, people in the countries that we're talking to, or in this set of countries, or in the coalitions of nation states that we are discussing the issue about. So let's start with, say, health, because health still remains something critical. We're just about recovering from COVID, but not yet there. And we are seeing multiple other challenges. The question is, in moving forward, how do global alliances, multi-country alliances, or multilateral bodies define what a global health framework should look like? I think somewhere down the line, we have really lost track of getting that framework to be equitable. We have been drawn into the politics of health rather than the equity or the equality of health services and right to good health globally. And so what would that mean? I think to me, it would mean is, how much is the world going to invest on, first, health research that doesn't look at very, very micro challenges, but looks at global health pandemic issues, and looks at it from the point of view of less developed countries and their needs as critical, and the developed nation and their role to support the less developed country in building and health infrastructure or a health system that will bring them at par, to those who are better off in their health access and services. Second is looking at, so the structure itself is one, and to me, that is a critical part of a feminist foreign policy discourse. If you're looking at health as a sector, to say, how are we as countries, how are we as either the Quad or the BIMSTEC or the ASEAN, the SARC, the G20, going to define this framework where we look at the structural needs of countries to deliver equitable health. And we saw how countries with very weak, poor structures suffered when a global pandemic hit. And I think it was unfair that the developed world, was equally affected, but had at least the structures in place to deal with it, whereas a lot of the less developing countries, economically weaker countries, really had to, deal with it with minimal resources till other countries decided to step in. And I think to that effect, I would say India really did play a yeoman's role in being first of the block to even share vaccines. You look at access to vaccines and wastage of vaccines between the African nations and the global developed nations of the North. I think it's criminal. You have an entire part of the globe who couldn't even access vaccines. And there was another part of the world, the well-off countries in the Northern Hemisphere, who ended up destroying vaccines because they were not used. And I think not discussing that as a part of the framework going forward on health is going to be highly unjust. The second issue is even in terms of health research. I hope that this pandemic becomes a learning for us as a world to say, what is an impact of a global health disaster? Is it same for all, or does it have a differential impact? Does it impact women more indifferently, children, people with disabilities, people with comorbidities, people with less nutritional status or weaker nutritional status? Health research needs to be driven by the needs of those who have less, not by the needs of those who have more or those who have it. And so I think, again, that's where the focus, when we say what's a feminist foreign policy going to look on health, that's the second thing. It is about getting that framing where we say, we are dealing with an issue which is critical to the world, but we cannot deal with it unless we drive our investments to make sure that it allows for the least privilege to have the maximum privilege, and therefore bringing them to equity. So I think that's, to me, is the other second pillar of having structure in place, having the research in space. The third is really ensuring that there is equity in distribution of any support that is needed, whether it's medical support, it's access to health service providers, caregivers, and there is a huge investment that's needed. One, to create those caregivers, to create those health service providers, from doctors to frontline caregivers to nurses. And I think investing in that part more equitably across, not just globally, but this also within our own nation states, within our own countries, is something that's important. Interestingly, I think if we look at India, one of the reasons that despite all the challenges, I think India still managed to do a very decent job of dealing with COVID was because we had these frontline service workers whom we pulled in when COVID happened, whether it's the Asha Didi, the Anganwadi worker. And I think it's a huge credit to them that we were able to reach almost the last mile. I would say, we worked in Jharkhand during that time as an organization and IMPRI. And I can tell you that without these frontline service providers, we probably would have not been able to reach 30 to 35% of the population in these very, very remote districts of India. And thanks to them, that they deserve an accolade. And so what is the lesson learned? Maybe as a world order, maybe as multilateral agencies which work on health, we need to be able to invest and identify and create and support these kind of last mile connectivity through human and structural access across the world. Because, COVID has just happened, but I guess given all the challenges of climate and environment and all the mutations we are facing, we're probably going to say, I don't want to be a doomsayer, but I think we're probably going to see more severe pandemics which impact the world collectively rather than in segments. Also because we are more connected in terms of, as a world today, in movement of people and goods. So I think keeping that in mind. So to me, if I say feminist foreign policy, health, here's what I would like to unpack it. And I would want people to understand that this is what we are trying to push for. And I think for India, given some of our successes at home, structures, and lessons learned the hard way as well, probably it's a leadership role we can play in defining a feminist health perspective going forward. That's just one sector. There are multiple. There is trade. There is digital health in India, in which India is taking a lead role. Solar and renewable energy. I think if we are disaster risk reduction, if we are to break these up sectorally, and it's going to take me more time, then I have to do that. And I think that's where I feel a clear vision and definition of what a feminist foreign policy could be can be put forward by India. And I think G20 provides us this opportunity, and the platform, the presidency provides us this opportunity and platform to do that, and really take to the center stage the statement that the Prime Minister made on emphasizing equitable growth and shared future. So yes, one Earth, one family, one future requires a common vision, a common vision on issues of access, rights, and equity, on issues of marginalized communities and people, on issues related to equitable sharing between the developed and the developing. The second thing I want to say is that, a lot of conversation happens around these are the difference between what people tend to define as soft and hard issues. And I prefer not to really get into that, because I think, to me, the health sector needs or the disaster risk reduction is as much a hard issue as a debate or a discourse on arms and war and border security. So I think unpacking that framing, that it's not, the world cannot divide itself in addressing issues saying, well, these are hard issues, so it requires more of our time, attention, and resources, and these are soft issues and they are important, but, and that but becomes a problem from where I'm looking at this whole issue. The other thing, of course, is for us to be able to look at a larger, just trying to frame it, the larger context of where the investments and the gains have been in the world that the women's movement has created, and collectively, I think the women's movement has made a lot of progress. And I feel that sometimes we tend to lose focus of those gains as we design new strategies and new thinking. Let's talk about peace processes, for example. The world has not been in conflict in a new way. We've been in conflict globally, in African countries, in the MENA region, in South Asia itself, in the neighborhood within South Asia. And in all the conflicts that the world has seen at large, I feel that the perspective of gender just gets left behind when at both levels, at first, the impact of the conflict on women and marginalized communities never comes forward. It just comes almost usually as an afterthought, saying, oh, we now need to look at them. It doesn't become the theme of the peace negotiations or the peace process almost ever, and I think that not having that at the center stage is going to be a challenge. We are in conflict globally across the world in many stages in the arena. We're going to see more conflicts, I'm assuming, given that we are getting more and more polarized. And while we try to bring up reduce the polarization, we also have to focus at, are we putting gender at the center stage of resolving conflicts and on the table when peace processes are being discussed, And what sometimes is annoying is to see that, you tend to think if you bring in 2 or 3 or 4 women to the table in a peace process, you tend to think that you have addressed gender, which really, we all know that's not the case. What is important is to see that in the negotiation of this peace process, are all the harms or the inequity faced by women and marginalized communities being addressed going forward? If not, you are leaving things to ferment and blow up again, maybe 5, 10, 15 years down the line. Not addressing these diverse inequities and differential impact does not mean that they are just going to go away because you have negotiated some sort of a peace process. We've seen that in the case of Afghanistan. The very fact when the initial phases when Taliban was overthrown and attempt to set up democratic governance was put in place, the core issues of control and marginalization of 50% of the population was talked but didn't get addressed effectively, and which is why today we are exactly in the same space we were in Afghanistan vis-a-vis gender issues and gender rights. And it is flowing beyond the borders of Afghanistan. And I'm just giving Afghanistan as an example, but we are seeing what's happening across the MENA region and other places. So I think peace process, peace negotiations, to me is the other area where a framing of a clearly defined, equitable, gender responsive understanding is something that would be essential for a country like India to have a say and have a role in. Also, because I think we need to learn in India from the internal conflicts we have seen, within our borders. And I think we have learned some lessons from it. We've tried to address those conflicts and these changes, across the country, across the states in India, including trying to mainstream people who became a part of a conflict because they felt marginalized in the first place, and then bringing them in to be at the center stage of the national development framework. And those are lessons that I think we should boldly and more aggressively take forward in the global stage, to be discussed and put forward as things that the world as a whole and multilateral agencies definitely need to have a say in and work towards. So I feel that, therefore, I think, for me, the feminist foreign policy lens is not a narrow lens to deal with soft and hard issues. It's about a perspective building that hinges on true belief in equity. It's a perspective that hinges on our understanding of what causes marginalization in the first place, and therefore what is required to deal with that marginalization, and to deal with it not by countering it with another layer of inequity, but to deal with it by really actually erasing the basis of the inequity itself. And I know that people will say, well, that means patriarchy. Well, yes, that means patriarchy. And honestly, I don't believe that it's so hard to get rid of patriarchy if you want to. I think the challenge is, do we want to? After all, we have collectively as a world come to a point where this issue has been raised and debated and contested. It's a perspective thing. Are the people who think they are in control and power, can they be brought to the table to say, your control and power is not effective because it doesn't take into consideration those who don't have it. Any control and power which hinges on the framing of really not recognizing that your control and power is at the cost of undermining somebody is not effective use of power. I am not saying that there is no going to be power hierarchy. There always will be, but the power hierarchy needs really to be cognizant of the understanding that the hierarchy cannot create more inequity. The hierarchy, it should be something that you use to enable equity. So those debates, I think those understanding and philosophical guidance is something I feel very clearly that, as a country, India should be at the forefront of defining. It's not going to happen overnight, but, it's an opportunity for us to say, what is it that we would like to put forward to the world in the understanding. So having taken two areas, which is, whether you say health and you want to call it a soft or a hard issue, and peace and power, I just think that these are framings that require a much deeper discourse and a kind of a better analytical positioning that can be provided by us and utilizing the G20 Presidency to create that voice and to create that framing is an opportunity. It is more needed today, given the challenges we are facing. What you don't want is the polarization to create larger divides between a global south and a global north. What the global south's voice should be today is to correct the inequitable framing of the world that the global north has pursued for years now. And I think that is the time for all of us to come together and start questioning where things, got played out in a way that patriarchy actually also translated to relationships between nation states. So challenging that becomes the key. The power dynamics will be something critical. That's also going to define how we look at areas of our different sectoral work across across the globe. And I feel that this is the opportunity for India to cash into. And I think in India, at least, I feel that the conversation when we started on feminist foreign policy was a little hesitant to begin with in the acceptance of the different institutions and the government structures. But today, I feel that there's a much larger opening to really unpack this, and I'd like us to be able to take advantage of that and be able to provide a more clearer roadmap for India to really encash on the one Earth, one family, and one future vision that the Prime Minister put forward when he took over the presidency of the G20. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, ma'am. I'm really grateful for whatever ma'am has said. Unfortunately, ma'am couldn't be with us, so we had the recorded version. However, if there are any questions, we would have those questions and we'll mail them to ma'am, and we'll see how she answers and we'll let you know. So if there are any questions, you can just put it in the chat box, in the question and answer box, and then we'll check.
Yeah, so we have Dikshita's question, and we can take a note of this and email ma'am along with Dikshita in the loop.
Ma'am, should we move on to the next speaker?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. We have with us our final speaker for today's session, Captain Alok Bansal ji, who will speak on India's security challenges in a changing world order. Captain Bansal is the director of Center for Security and Strategy, India Foundation. Again, thank you so much, sir, for joining us. We wish you luck and hope to have a good session with you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ashwath, for introduction. What I have decided to speak to the audience is India's security challenges in light of changing world order. And the world order keeps changing. And in fact, the time that's available to me is extremely short. So what I'll do is that I would focus primarily on three recent world developments, which will have an overall impact on India's security challenges. So I thought I'll just cover these three small points and then take on questions. So in next 15-20 minutes, I'll just try and speak about these. The first important development that has taken place in recent times, and that's very, very important, is, as you know, just a few days back, People's Republic of China, that is Xi Jinping, managed to negotiate a peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, wherein these two countries, which have been antagonistic towards each other for decades, have agreed to at least reestablish their diplomatic relations. I'm not trying to say that this reestablishment of diplomatic relations will overnight make them friends, but it is definitely a big, big thing. And this has positioned China as a global leader. It has actually pitchforked Xi Jinping as somebody who has the potential to bring sworn adversaries together. Of course, what will be that impact? We'll come to it later. If at all, the animosity between these two countries actually come to a knot, because this adversarial position has had its impact in Syria, in Yemen, even in other parts of the Arab world and the Islamic world that we have been seeing. How it will shape and what will be the impact, I'll come to it a little later. But this is the first major development and the most recent development that has taken place. But not only that, what is emerging out of that is that Xi Jinping is also planning to visit Russia and then talk to Ukrainian president virtually to try and resolve the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which has now been for almost a year plus, and creates and has created a huge turbulence. Now, if, and I'm not very optimistic, but if he succeeds in doing so, it would definitely pitchfork Xi Jinping as a global statesman. And that's what he's hoping for. I think if he succeeds in that, he would be a strong contender for a global Nobel Peace Prize. So this is one development which I feel is very, very important. And since it is too recent a development, I'm not delving too much of time, but it is nevertheless an extremely, extremely significant development. While taking up Q&A, we will try and discuss what are the impact of this development. The second major development has been Russia-Ukraine war, which has now been going on for over a year plus. Now, what is Russia-Ukraine war? How it has impacted? What are the implications? We need to understand. When Russia attacked Ukraine, Russia had valid reasons for doing so. Let's be very clear about it. Right from the time when the Soviet Union disintegrated, certain assurances were given to Russia that NATO will not expand eastward. The real relevance of NATO itself had actually come into questioning after Soviet Union's disintegration. But none of these assurances that were given to Russia to reassure it and assure it that there's no threat to its security kept being pushed under the carpet one by one. And of course, we saw large number of Warsaw Pact countries, one after the other, became members of NATO. Not only that, the former Soviet states like the Baltic republics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, also joined NATO. Now, this actually pushed Russia into a corner, which eventually Russia thought that it needed to do something. And then, of course, we saw what happened when President Putin launched an offensive against Ukraine. When Putin launched an offensive against Ukraine, his aim was not to go for a debilitating, protracted war. He was hoping that he'll be able to capture Kyiv in a swift attack, install a government that was favorably inclined towards Russia. And please remember, at that point of time, there was a substantive portion of Ukrainian population which had its allegiance towards Russia, which viewed Russia favorably. So he thought that by changing a government, he'll be in a position to negotiate with them a certain peace deals and bring about a change which will be beneficial to Russia. One of the contenders who could have been brought in was the former president, Viktor Yanukovych, who was legally and properly elected as the president of Ukraine, but was removed from his position in a manner which is suspect. So that was one of the things. And this plan had been going on in Russia for a long time. And what we realize is that the United States of America had been saying it for a very long period of time that Russia is going to attack Ukraine, Russia is going to attack Ukraine, which indicates that the higher policy-making bodies of Russia had been infiltrated by American intelligence agencies. In fact, so stark was the difference that America was telling that Russia is going to invade Ukraine, whereas Ukrainian president was saying that no, nothing of that sort exists. This is unnecessarily alarmist view that the West is propagating. There was a time when this sort of a situation was happening. Nevertheless, Americans were proved right. Russia attacked Ukraine. When it attacked Ukraine, neither the West nor the Ukraine anticipated the way the conflict will shape up. Ukraine was expecting that the attack will come from the east along Donbas region, where two breakaway republics from Ukraine, that is Donetsk and Luhansk, were located, and whose independence had been recognized by Russia just a few days before the war. So they thought the focus will be on these two republics, and consequently, Ukraine had built up its defensive capabilities along this corridor, and they were hoping that the Russian attack will come, and they had prepared well to defend that territory against a Russian offensive. Unfortunately for Ukraine, surprisingly, the main Russian offensive that came on Ukraine came primarily from south, from the Crimean Peninsula, and from the north, not only from Russian territory, but also from Belarusian territory. And this resulted in huge panic in first 24 hours. We saw that Russian forces almost reached halfway through Kyiv. after that initial confusion, we saw that President Zelensky rose up to the occasion, managed to rally his countrymen, and thereafter the Ukrainians gave a protracted fight. And once they started giving a protracted fight, the Russians realized that they'll not be able to capture Kyiv without a large bloodshed, which went against the whole policy which Russia at that point of time was pursuing. Their aim was not to antagonize the population, but manage to capture and change the regime in Ukraine, which was not happening. So eventually Russia pulled out. And now we saw that they tried to capture a tactical corridor extending all the way from Crimean Peninsula to Donetsk. Now this conflict has gone on. Now both the sides have taken maximalist positions. Russia is talking of 4 republics where it has carried out a referendum, and they say that those are breakaway. They have joined Russia. They should become part of Russia. Ukraine is talking of liberating all its territory, including Crimea and Donetsk republics, the republics in Donbass, which is unlikely to be met. Now, with that sort of a maximalist position, this conflict is unlikely to end in normal course. Now, this requires an external intervention, which is not coming at this point of time. And that is where China's initiative becomes extremely significant, because should they succeed, it would definitely enhance their stature. Now, what are the impacts of Russia-Ukraine war? As you know, it has raised the Europe's energy prices. Europe, which at that point of time, before the conflict started, was moving away from United States. Most European states were taking foreign policy decisions which were independent of the United States and at times at variance with US policies. Trump's presidency had actually driven large number of European countries away from US. But this conflict actually pushed Europe back into the arms of America, because the Europeans realized that if Russia can attack Ukraine, it can attack any other European country as well. And their defense preparedness to face an onslaught like that was virtually zero. So many of them have actually gone back to NATO. Not only that, the countries which had been for decades neutral, like Sweden, or countries which were treaty bound to remain neutral, like Finland, have also applied for membership of NATO. So this has, in the long term, not served Russia's purpose, which Russia was set out to. At the same time, Europe is actually drawn to US. There has been a crisis of food. There has been a crisis of energy. From India's point of view, it has actually put us into a very, very precarious situation. Because as Russia faces the onslaught of the West, Russia is becoming more and more dependent on China. Now, this Sino-Russian axis does not augur well for India's long-term interests. So this is where we are and how it is impacting. Not only that, if you look at what this conflict has done, it has actually turned a large number of CIS states which were totally dependent on Russia have started showing their independence. Almost all of them, barring a few, have maintained a neutral posture. In fact, some of them have gone to the extent of criticizing Russian aggression in Ukraine, which was an idea which was inconceivable a few years back. Similarly, you saw at the height of the conflict, US president trying and ringing up and trying to talk to the Saudi crown prince and to talk to the UAE ruler. And these two leaders refused to take US president's call. Now that again created, that this conflict has created numerous scope for leaders to defy the United States. The United States position as numero uno actually came under a serious challenge during this particular conflict. So this is the second major event that I was talking about. And I will talk about developments in India's immediate vicinity, especially in AFPAC region, though of course all the countries in India's vicinity have undergone transformation. We have Myanmar, which had a military coup, which has derailed India's plans for looking east, rather acting east, which we were trying to do because of a military coup. Otherwise, India was looking in a big way, accessing the Southeast Asia through Myanmar. Unfortunately, that military coup has put a hold on it. Sri Lanka has seen the financial crisis. You heard what Ambassador Shashank said, that India was one of the leaders which actually tried to help Sri Lanka come out of this financial crisis. But Sri Lanka continues to be in a state of a dire economic state at this point of time. Of course, we have seen Nepal undergo political turbulence. We have seen Maldives undergo elections and now again into an election mode. But my focus when I say the recent developments in neighborhood, it's going to be in Afghanistan, Pakistan. First, I'll just cover Afghanistan, and which we need to understand that in Afghanistan, Taliban has captured power. It was a regime that was propped up by Pakistan and its supporters. The manner in which the government in Kabul crumbled was actually shocking because it had a very, very strong and powerful military. But it crumbled because the support structure that existed vanished overnight. And I think there was a certain amount of complicity between and some sort of connivance between United States and Taliban, which facilitated Taliban's capturing of power. After capturing power, we have seen there have been differences between Taliban and Pakistan. We have seen that in Pakistan, radicalization has been growing in the form of Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which has actually been aggravating the situation for Pakistan. Even Chinese visitors, wherever they used to stay in a hotel, have been targeted. So there have been attacks on these. But how does Taliban's presence in Afghanistan augur for India? And I have my personal viewpoint on this, and this is that Taliban's presence in Afghanistan, or an Afghanistan that is ruled by Taliban, does not augur well for India or for the regional security. And I have 4 reasons for it. One is theological. Please understand, theologically, for jihad, the jihadi group needs to possess a territory, which Al-Qaeda did not really possess ever since the Taliban had been pushed out of Afghanistan. And consequently, we saw large number of groups affiliated to Al-Qaeda shift their allegiance to Islamic State, which at one stage held large chunk of territory. So theologically, all these radical outfits which are aligned to Al-Qaeda, Taliban, etc., will grow in strength because of Taliban's presence in Afghanistan. Secondly, what has happened is that globally it has been projected that a ragtag militia like Taliban has successfully managed to defeat a superpower like the United States of America. This has actually psychologically bolstered all sorts of insurgent groups, anti-national groups, including in some parts of India. The third factor which we need to understand is that although till now that peace has not descended, and I am very, very confident that that sort of a peace is unlikely to descend in Afghanistan in any time in near future. But if peace descends, we need to understand that the foot soldiers of Taliban are unlikely to start plowing the land. So they will simply move away from Afghanistan in search of new battlegrounds. And some of those battlegrounds could be within India and in our neighborhood. So that's another danger that we have. And fourth is, of course, the ideological point, which we need to understand, that the ideology that Al-Qaeda and Taliban propagate eventually aims to create a global Islamic emirate. And so it is not likely to remain confined to the geographical frontiers of Afghanistan. It is an ideology that is by nature expansionist, and it would seek newer and newer territories. We are already seeing their movement into Pakistan and other areas. And if they remain unchecked, they would like to push their ideology across the borders into India. This, in sum total, is my point of view as far as threat that emanates from Afghanistan is concerned. Now, coming to Pakistan. Now, Pakistan, as you know, when Taliban captured power in Kabul, Pakistan was extremely happy that they have successfully defeated, quote unquote, India in Afghanistan. But what is the situation today? We have a situation that with the Afghanistan going under Taliban, Firstly, Pakistan's relevance to most of the countries like United States have actually failed. The CPEC, which was touted as the panacea for all Pakistan's ill, has really not been able to deliver. It has set up a large number of power plants, it has built roads, but it is not generating revenues. Pakistan is producing one of the costliest powers in the world. And now Pakistan faces a grave economic crisis. Today, if you look at it, the Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves with State Bank of Pakistan is just above $4 billion, just sufficient to last for a month. Now, this $4.74 billion which the State Bank of Pakistan has already includes $3 billion with the Saudi Arabia loan, which they have recycled or allowed it to continue. In addition, $1.3 billion have been given by China recently. China has also recycled some of its loan. So technically, Pakistan has already defaulted, but for the support from these countries, it would have defaulted. But now its attempts to get further funding from any of these so-called friendly countries, that is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, or China, has come to a naught. Because all these countries are saying that you please first negotiate with IMF, and once IMF grants you loan, then we will go ahead. Now, this has resulted in huge fall in the rupee of the Pakistani rupee, which is now quoting around 282, 283 rupees to a dollar. It's almost fallen by 40% in last few months. Consequently, what has happened is, with the foreign exchange reserves having depleted, Pakistan does not have money to pay for imports. Just today's newspaper carried the Pakistan State Oil, which is the public sector unit or the state-owned enterprise, as Pakistan likes to call it, which buys oil from refineries. Almost 50% of the oil and gas that is bought by this PSO, does not have money to pay the refineries. And refineries don't have money to actually import oil. No foreign bank is willing to open a letter of credit for Pakistan's oil import. Only one Saudi bank at the moment is willing to do so. So in days to come, you are going to face a very, very serious fuel crisis. Already energy prices have shot through the roof. The petroleum, diesel prices have been increased many times last few months. And many times at one go of 20 rupees, 30 rupees, that has been the level of increase per liter in recent times. Then there is, of course, a food shortage. Pakistan used to export wheat, but this year because of the floods, there is an acute economic crisis. It's importing wheat. It is in a bad shape. Similarly, critical components for various industries are not being allowed to import, and as a result, its exports are falling. Now, for 7 successive months in the current financial year, and Pakistan's financial year is from July to June, the large-scale manufacturing rate has been dropping down, and that's creating a problem. So Pakistan faces a serious economic crunch. And it is at this point of time that you have a political crisis. You have a political crisis because Imran Khan and PTI, which had come to power in last elections, were pushed out through a vote of no confidence. And today you have a government led by Mr. Shehbaz Sharif, which is actually an alliance of disparate political parties which have come together and are bound by their single point agenda of keeping Imran Khan out. Otherwise, they are very diverse. PT, like Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz of Nawaz Sharif and PPP of Zardari were bitter foes till recently, but they have all come together with a single point agenda of keeping Imran Khan out. Now, Imran Khan may have been a bad administrator, which there is no doubt. He may not understand anything about governance, but he has managed to win the popular support. Firstly, because after his withdrawal, the current government has been forced to increase the prices of food, fuel, etc. And inflation is at 31.25%, the highest in 50 years. And consequently, common man who is suffering has bought Imran Khan's narrative that this is a foreign conspiracy to throw his government out. Now, Imran Khan has been pushing for elections. And in his gamble to go for an election, he's actually forced his supporters in Punjab and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa to resign, to actually dissolve the assemblies, which have been dissolved. But the governors who are appointees of the present government and the Election Commission of Pakistan, which for some time had been taking an anti-Imran Khan stance, are unwilling to conduct an election. The president, who is actually Imran Khan appointee, has been pushing them, but has not been. And now we are seeing for last 2 days, there is a drama going on where a court in Islamabad has issued a warrant of arrest for Imran Khan. The police is outside his home. His supporters are not allowing them to move in. Yeah, and today, of course, Lahore court has actually given him a stay till tomorrow morning from arresting him. But this sort of a political turbulence creates greater problem. And it is in the light of this developments that you already have what you are seeing is the resurgence of TTP. Because with the capture of power by Taliban in Afghanistan, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, whose cadres were fighting with Taliban, have now become free and they are now come back to Pakistan. Also, they feel that if Taliban can defeat United States America, for them to defeat Pakistan military should be a cakewalk. So with this renewed enthusiasm, you are seeing that the TTP is moving forward. What is even more ironical is that the TTP has made several tactical alliances this time, wherein they have actually tied up with Baloch nationalist organizations, which are left-leaning secularist and generally antagonistic to Taliban. So we are seeing that there are certain collaboration between Baloch and TTP. So the crisis in our vicinity is growing. And all these crises create challenges for us. As I said, they have economic challenges for us, but more importantly, they pose serious security challenges for us. What these challenges are, you all well understand. There are a problem that Lebanonization of Pakistan may take place. And Lebanonization of Pakistan is not in our interest. And what is Lebanonization? I must define here. Lebanonization, according to me, as I define, is a state where the external facade of a country remains intact, but the internal actors become so strong and autonomous that they deal independently with not only with one another, but also with external powers. As used to happen in Lebanon in 70s and 80s, when Hezbollah would one day fight with Amal militia, next day fight with Maronite Christians, third day fight with Druze, one day fight with Israeli army, the next day fight with Syrian army. Now, that sort of a scenario happening in Pakistan where Taliban with TTP becomes Pakistan's Hezbollah is not in our favor. A balkanization of Pakistan may not be bad for India. But at the present status, we are seeing that the Pakistan's cohesion is getting eroded by the day, and that could in times to come pose certain problems and create problems for India. Of course, I am not one of those who propagates a strong Pakistan as in India's interest, certainly not. So these are some of the developments that are taking place, which have a serious impact on India's security. And these will create challenges for India at a time when India has the G20 presidency and the world is looking at India with a constant gaze. So with this, I would like to end here and take on question and answers. In any case, I thought this would be more an interactive session than anything else. That's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. It was really, really amazing listening to you and all the detailed information that you have just provided. Thank you so much for that wonderful lecture. So, there is a question by Ashwini Ghatikar. Ashwini, if you would like to unmute and ask the question yourself.
Yeah, good evening, sir. Can you hear me?
Just introduce yourself and ask the question. I would like to know who you are also. That's important. Yeah.
Okay, sir. So I'm Ashwini Ghatikar. I'm from Bangalore. So I'm a MA Public Policy student, and my area of interest lies in foreign policy. So basically, I'm very much, I like whatever information you gave and the thing, whatever you said, that was really interesting. And I'm very much interested in these topics. So it was nice to learn a lot from you. And my question was, can you please throw a light, much more light on this Myanmar coup that happened, and what are the external factors that have influenced it? What might be any external factors?
See, Myanmar's coup is an internal issue. Let me be very honest with you. The coup has not been instigated by external actors. The coup is driven primarily by internal actors. But the coup has brought in external actors because, as you know, the Western world at this point of time has a renewed zeal for imposing democracy. So they are trying to counter Myanmar. ASEAN is lukewarm because Myanmar is one of the countries. So they are not while they are paying the lip service to democracy, they are not doing it. China and India, as usual, are collaborating with the regime forces without creating anything. But the fact is that the regime is unpopular. Let there be no doubt about it that the regime is unpopular. But the population does not have the wherewithal to overthrow the military regime. Though they have tried to join with a lot of ethnic armies which are there on the Myanmar's periphery. So the result of this is that the Myanmar is going to remain turbulent in foreseeable future. And that creates a problem for us because for us, Myanmar was extremely critical. See, we cannot antagonize the government of the day in Myanmar because it has a lot of security connotation for us. We are dependent on Myanmar for security in our northeast. We were also dependent, and which is very important, is that we were looking at Myanmar to get us access to Southeast Asia, overland access. Please understand, in India's case, we have a very ironical situation that to our north, we have China and to our west, we have Pakistan, which will never give us overland access. Pakistan will not. China may be willing to give us. So consequently, for a growing economy like India, which needs more resources and more bigger markets, the only avenue open to us is east. And that's where we were looking at Act East. Unfortunately, this turbulence in Myanmar prevents us from doing that. So as of now, Tatmadaw, or as the military in Myanmar is called, is firmly in control. But in the periphery, there is huge turbulence. The violence continues unabated. The public is against the military, but military is unwilling to yield power. So that's where the problem is, and we have to look. The international community is trying to put pressure, but not enough. So that's where the stage is as far as Myanmar is concerned.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. I would request Vibha to please ask the question. Vibha, you can also introduce yourself.
Good evening, sir. I'm Vibha Gati Srish. I'm currently pursuing Masters in International Relations and National Security from Rashtriya Raksha University. Sir, my question to you is, you spoke about the PRC brokered peace deal and that it has positioned China as a global leader, and the possibility of China, Xi Jinping becoming a global statesman if the Russia-Ukraine conflict is resolved. So what would be the implication of that for India's position, and how can India navigate through the entire situation?
See, I must confess that I was also surprised because this was a big achievement, but I personally feel we should have also taken initiative to do this thing, what Xi Jinping has done. And in fact, I have been propagating for a long time that India is rightly positioned to do something between Russia and Ukraine. Regrettably, our foreign policy establishment is slightly conservative. So we are unwilling to take risks which may lead in failure. So that play safe attitude doesn't permit us to do something. Otherwise, I think there is no reason why India should not be taking initiative to pursue this sort of a thing. But as I said, yes, China's rise does pose a threat for us. There is no doubt about it, because China is a big challenge for India. It may not be a threat, but definitely is a challenge for India. And I think we need to be careful, because ideally what China is doing, we should have been doing it. That would have actually pitchforked us into the centrality of the global community, where India would have been established as a leader which is willing to take actions, willing to deal with global crisis and take initiative. That we have not done. I only hope things go better from here. But this is, of course, a crisis. I have no doubts about it, that this is a big achievement for China. Though I am not very sure whether this peace will last long. So if it doesn't last long, nothing will happen. But if Iran, Saudi Arabia rapprochement lasts, then it will be a big, big victory for China. Let there be no doubt about it. That would be a very, very big achievement for China.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, Harsh.
Yes, ma'am.
Harsh, yes.
Good evening, sir. Myself, Harsh Bhagat. I am pursuing Masters at RRU in International Relations and Security Studies. So my question is that you mentioned about the TTP and its increasing ground. Like recently there was a statement by this TTP leader and several groups in the vicinity like Tehrik-e-Labad. They give a statement like this, that if Pakistan wants loan, then they should take a check in one hand and a nuclear bomb in second hand. So there has been increasing radicalization with TTP gaining ground in the vicinity of Pakistan. So with this radicalization increasing, what can be the threats to India's bordering areas? Like, do you see any threats to the border security being compromised with this increasing radicalization?
See, radicalization of Pakistan is a very, very serious threat. First fact, we need to understand that radicalization is inherent in ideology of Pakistan. Because when you create a nation state premised on the belief that Muslims of the subcontinent are a separate nation, the next logical question is, who is a Muslim? Pakistan has been beset with this problem as early as 1953, when anti-Ahmadiyya riots took place, and they were forced to decide as to Munir Kayani Commission was constituted to decide whether Ahmadiyyas are Muslims or non-Muslims. And it's interesting. But the fact is, because you created a nation state premised on religion, the religion acquired certain amount of primacy. And whenever you give primacy to religion, extremism always grows. And in Pakistan's case, in the initial years, they tried to subsume the ethnic fault lines by promoting an all-inclusive Islamic identity. And consequently, we are seeing radicalization, which has been growing since then. And today it has become a big, big menace. In fact, so big a menace it is that you're talking of TLP and TTP. There was an incident, which I don't know how many of you saw, that one student, along with some accomplices, cut a girl student, along with her accomplices, killed her teacher at the gate of the school. In fact, chopped her head off because she had a dream that the teacher had committed a blasphemy. Can there be something more ironical and dangerous than this? That an individual is willing to kill her teacher just because she had a dream that this lady had committed a blasphemy. So that is the level of radicalization that is there. Now, the problem of radicalization is that a radicalization for the first time is seeping into the Pakistani armed forces. And that erodes the cohesion of Pakistan, as I said. And if Pakistan army, because Pakistan's case, it is the army which has got a state. It is a state which has been artificially cobbled up and kept together by the Pakistan army, because there are serious fault lines in Pakistan. And despite those fault lines, the state has survived is because the Pakistan army has artificially kept them together. And that is a problem, because this army has, if this army's cohesion also erodes, then as I said, you will have a situation where there will be a Lebanonization. And if Lebanonization happens, then what happens? Supposing a non-state actor carries out attacks across borders, how do you respond? There has already been a case which happened a few years back when across Punjab border, there was an attack which was not carried out by Pakistan army, but by some non-state actor. How do you respond? And who responds? The government of India responds, or the Indian army responds, it will be an act of war. So that has to be defined. So those are the issues. The second problem which we need to understand is that if the society gets radicalized, supposing the radical elements capture power in Pakistan, what happens? Firstly, they'll propagate all this sort of radical ideology all over. But more significantly, there'll be a significant chunk of population which would not like to live under that Talibanized regime. They may want to go away. Where would they want to go away? There'll be the only one of the major destinations for them will be India. You'll say we have a border fence. The fences are meant to actually stop smugglers, terrorists, infiltrators. It cannot stop millions of women and children trying to come across. So how will you deal with it? Those are the issues. There are, of course, many other issues: radicalization, nuclear weapons. What will happen to Pakistan with nuclear weapons? The radioactive material might fall into the hands of these non-state actors. So there are a lot of threats which we could discuss. It's too short a time. Pakistan, I generally take a lecture for 1.5 hours. So it's too short a period for me to say. But radicalization is a serious threat. If anybody is in Jindal, I'm talking tomorrow on radicalization in Pakistan, tomorrow in Jindal. So that's.
Thank you, sir. Karishma, your question.
Thank you for the session, sir. I'm Karishma Talreja, a research scholar from the University of Mumbai. My question is actually in yesterday's session, the importance of India building or indulging in trust building exercises was mentioned, especially towards Pakistan to improve the security within this region. In terms of working on looking at other avenues of cooperation, what could be the ways if we could look at people-to-people contact or track 2 or track 3 diplomacy as a way of improving regional security with a view to overcoming water scarcity or other environmental issues vis-a-vis India, Pakistan? How can this be done or encouraged, or is there really potential for us to look at this?
See, I have been a strong votary for track 2 dialogues with Pakistan, people-to-people contact, as well as trade with Pakistan. Because India's eventual aim should be to create a South Asian Union. Our eventual aim should be a South Asian Union passing through South Asian Economic Union. You may call it Akhand Bharat, you may call it anything, but that should be your eventual game, because that is when you actually acquire your natural geographical frontiers. And that is where you have to actually go and advance. But no South Asian Economic Union, South Asian Union has been feasible for last so many decades because of a Pakistan which is a byproduct of two-nation theory. Please understand, all those who say that India's conflict with Pakistan is for A, B, or C reason are all flawed. India's conflict with Pakistan is primarily ideological. A Pakistan which is a byproduct of two-nation theory poses an existential ideological threat to a secular India and vice versa. So as long as Pakistan as a byproduct of two-nation theory exists and abides by two-nation theory, there cannot be any lasting peace. So eventually either Pakistan has to give up this two-nation theory or Pakistan has ceased to exist. Now, with Pakistan, as I said, you may have problems with Pakistan, but the people of Pakistan, you have to reach out to them. And that's where I feel people-to-people contact, etc. should reach out, should continue the track 2 dialogues, people-to-people contact, trade. Trade is very, very important, because trade, if there was trade today, if there was normal trade between India and Pakistan, Pakistan would be economically totally dependent on India today. Please understand, if conventional wisdom would have gone, bulk of the petroleum products for Pakistan would have been emanating from India, actually, if that was a conventional wisdom. Many of their raw materials would have been emanating from India. The pharmaceuticals would have been, which are almost many times more expensive than India, would have actually been going from India. So Pakistan's economy would have been to a very great extent dependent on India if there was a free flow of trade. And that would have probably exposed Pakistan's population to what's happening in India, and probably would have the poisoning of minds that has been done over decades would have actually reduced. So that is my perception as far as my view is concerned. But lasting peace with Pakistan, which still abides by two-nation theory, to my mind is not feasible. There can be tactical alliances, tactical rapprochement. No way. Like a lot of people said, Pakistan no longer poses a threat. I don't agree with it. Pakistan poses an ideological threat, and that ideological threat will remain. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. There is also a question by Sneha. Sneha, if you could just ask the question yourself.
Yes. Good evening, sir. It was a great session listening to you. My question is, I'm a aspiring civil servant. My question is, if there is any possible scenario of Lebanization of Pakistan, then which international organization could control the entire scenario? And in this aspect, what would be the International Court of Justice role for this matter, where the non-state actors dominate the military rule and change the entire scenario?
See, to my mind, International Court of Justice has no role in that sort of a scenario. But as I said, Lebanonization of Pakistan must be avoided at all cost, even if it requires its balkanization. So if you feel that Pakistan is heading towards Lebanonization, I have long propagated that we should create circumstances which leads to its balkanization rather than Lebanonization. That's all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. And there's a final question by Ashwash. Ashwash, please go ahead and ask the question.
Yes. Sir, my question was on the front of our focus on Pakistan, right? Sir, basically when we see and talk about the threat that Pakistan faces, that we face from Pakistan, sir, do you think that it kind of overshadows the threat, that the impending threat that we see from countries like China, or for that matter, from security challenges that we face from something like Myanmar, given that some days back, the junta army, there were news of spilling over of bombings into Mizoram, and these are alleged issues. However, people in Mizoram are also talking about it, and they're also talking about the lack of a larger response from New Delhi. So also given the fact that we talk about our idea, our stance of Vishwaguru, especially how incredibly good we have done in terms of Operation Dose. However, at the same time, coming back to Myanmar, sir, we see that there are around 1.7 million displaced people in Myanmar, and India does not really have a foreign policy that takes into consideration the displaced people of Myanmar, or for that matter, a particular stance that directly talks about the coup that happened in Myanmar. So do you think we should also focus on these avenues of Myanmar and China, given that these are impending dooms that might face us in the near future?
See, I just wanted to tell you, Pakistan, as I said, to my mind, Pakistan is crucial because it poses an existential ideological threat to India. So that's important. As far as China is concerned, unlike in 60s, today China does not pose an ideological threat, because today's China is communist only in name. It has more bigger capitalists than any other country in probably Asia. So it's a capitalist. With China today, we have a boundary dispute, an extremely complex and vexed boundary dispute. But let me be very clear, China does not want war with India. Chinese population is not antagonistic to India. You talk to an average Chinese, he has no ill will towards India, unlike many in Pakistan who have been brainwashed into believing that India is out to undo Pakistan. Now, coming to Myanmar, see, our attitude towards Myanmar is actually primarily driven by what happened last time. You remember, much before, I think in 1999, we had the elections in Myanmar, the first elections, which NLD swept through and the military did not support. And that point of time, if you remember, we had actually supported NLD and democracy movement, thinking that the population, when the party enjoys so much of popular support, eventually the military will have to give way. Unfortunately, it did not happen. And military continued to rule. And Myanmar is critical for us because, as I said, large number of insurgents in Northeast India crisscross the international border. So it's essential that you need to collaborate with them to actually crush them. And since we realized that the military was not going anywhere, we started collaborating with them. And that experience of that first visit of 1999, I think, was the factor that this time also we have not taken any strong position against the coup. We have made pro forma statements, but we have really not taken very strong actions. Now, this bombing across international borders, I don't know if you remember that there was a time when Myanmar Air Force also bombed people across international border in China, sometimes back, many years ago, which actually killed Chinese nationals. At least in this particular case, there was no such issue which would have aggravated the situation. So we have a situation. The only thing I feel is that now a time has come where government of India should also engage with the democracy or the government which is actually being, the NLD has set up a shadow government. We should also keep engaging with them while continuing our lines of communication open with Myanmar. We could engage with the democratic forces also in Myanmar. But it is an important policy decision which government of India has to take one day. If the government of India actually decides to support the other side, you could see a transformation. I'm sure many of the ASEAN countries would also probably come out openly supporting the democratic forces. But again, as I said, our foreign policy establishment for last few decades has by and large been conservative, risk averse. We like to take safe posture. It's been successful. So that's how it is. When you take risks, there may be failures, there may be successes. So there may be huge gains, there may be huge failures. And that's why I think we have not tried, because we feel that we should not fail. The fear of failure, I think, guides to a very great extent our foreign policy establishment.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It has been really insightful listening to you and your thoughts. Wonderful. Thank you so much for sparing your time this evening and sharing your thoughts with all of us. I would request Ashwash to finally conclude. Ashwash.
Yes. Thank you so much, ma'am. Again, I would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI, Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies, CIRSS. We are again grateful to our experts for the day 2 of this online certificate training program, Ambassador Shashank, Captain Alok Bansal, and Ms. Nandita Barua. And also to our convener and moderator, Dr. Simi Mehta, for moderating this session. We thank all our participants who have raised pertinent questions and have actively participated in today's deliberations. We look forward to welcoming more distinguished experts tomorrow. We are grateful if you are watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our podcast or reading our publications. We hope you continue joining us in the future in our web policy talks and in the web policy dialogues. With this, I wish you all a very good evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.